If you keep animals, work the land, and grow your own food, then you carry a responsibility most people never think about, because the homestead is full of hidden dangers that a city dweller will never face. Out in the pastures, along the fence rows, in the hay you feed and the fields you clear, there are plants that can kill a cow, a horse, a goat, or a chicken, and some that can seriously harm you and your family too. Every experienced homesteader learns these plants, often the hard way, through the heartbreak of a lost animal. Today, I am going to help you learn them the easy way, walking you through 8 deadly plants every homesteader must know, so you can protect your family, your livestock, and your livelihood. Now let me be clear about my purpose here, the way a good friend would. This is not meant to frighten you off the land you love, but to arm you with the knowledge that keeps a homestead safe. Most of these plants can be managed once you know how to spot them, and knowing them is simply part of being a good steward of your animals and your ground. So pull on your boots and walk the property with me in your mind, and let me show you 8 plants that every person working the land should be able to recognize on sight. We begin with water hemlock, widely considered the most violently poisonous plant in all of North America, and a genuine threat on any homestead with wet ground. It grows along streams, ditches, ponds, and marshy pasture, and its thick roots are extraordinarily toxic, resembling the roots of edible plants closely enough that both people and animals have died from them. Livestock are especially at risk when they graze wet areas in spring or when flooding exposes the roots. Learn to recognize this plant. Keep animals away from the wet, boggy corners of your land where it thrives, and never let anyone dig or forage roots from those areas without absolute expert certainty. It is worth fencing off the boggiest corners of your land entirely, because a single grazing animal on wet ground in early spring is exactly the tragedy this plant is known for. The second plant is poison hemlock, the infamous cousin of water hemlock, which loves the disturbed ground so common on a homestead, springing up along fences, lanes, corrals, and field edges. With its lacy white flowers and fern-like leaves, it can be mistaken for wild carrot or parsley, and every part is intensely toxic to people and animals alike. The real danger to livestock often comes when it gets cut and baled into hay, where animals cannot avoid it. Walk your fields before cutting hay. Learn to spot its smooth, purple-blotched stems, and remove it from grazing areas carefully, with gloves, never burning it, as the smoke is harmful. It has spread aggressively across rural land in recent years, so even homesteaders who never saw it a decade ago are finding it along their lanes and pasture edges today. Third, we have larkspur, one of the deadliest plants a cattle rancher can face, responsible for the loss of countless cattle across grazing country every single year. With its tall, elegant spikes of blue and purple flowers, larkspur is beautiful, but it is packed with potent toxins, especially in its young growth, and cattle are particularly vulnerable to it. It often grows in pastures and on rangeland, tempting animals early in the season. If you graze cattle, learning to identify larkspur and manage where and when your animals graze around it is one of the most important skills you can develop, and it can save you from devastating and sudden losses. Many old ranchers time their grazing carefully around it, keeping cattle off the worst areas until the plant has passed its most dangerous early stage, a piece of hard-won wisdom worth learning from. The fourth plant is bracken fern, a common and aggressive fern that spreads across pastures, woodland edges, and neglected ground on many homesteads. What makes bracken so dangerous is that it is toxic to livestock over time, and animals that graze it repeatedly, or eat it in hay, can suffer serious cumulative harm. Horses and cattle are especially at risk, and the danger is sneaky because it builds up rather than striking all at once. If bracken fern is taking over your grazing land, it is worth managing actively, keeping animals from relying on it, and making sure it does not end up baled into the hay that feeds them through winter. Because its harm builds slowly and quietly, an animal can be grazing it for a long time before any trouble shows, which is exactly what makes it so easy to overlook until real damage is done. Number 5 is the yew, that dark, dense evergreen shrub so often planted as an ornamental hedge around farmhouses. and one of the most sudden and deadly threats to livestock there is. The danger is severe and fast, because yew is extraordinarily toxic, and animals have died within hours of eating even a small amount. A particularly tragic and common mistake is tossing yew hedge clippings over the fence into a pasture, where curious animals eat them and are quickly killed. If you have yew anywhere near your animals, know exactly where it is, never dispose of clippings where livestock can reach them, and consider removing it from around your paddocks entirely. Every seasoned stockman has heard the same heartbreaking story of healthy animals found dead in the morning after someone innocently tossed a few hedge trimmings over the fence, never dreaming they were deadly. The sixth plant is the wild black cherry, a common tree along fence lines and woodland edges that hides a deadly seasonal danger for livestock. While the ripe fruit has its uses, the leaves contain compounds that release cyanide, and they become especially dangerous when they wilt, such as after a branch falls in a storm or is trimmed. Cattle and other animals that eat wilted cherry leaves can die surprisingly fast. This is one every homesteader with grazing animals must know. After any storm or trimming, check your pastures and fence lines for fallen cherry branches and remove them before your animals can reach those deadly wilting leaves. Curiously, animals often will not touch the fresh leaves on the living tree, but the sweeter smell of the wilting leaves after a branch comes down can draw them straight to the danger. Number 7 is tansy ragwort, along with its relatives in the ragwort and groundsel family, a serious and widespread threat especially to horses and cattle. With its clusters of small yellow flowers, ragwort spreads through pastures and along roadsides, and it contains compounds that cause slow, cumulative damage to the liver. The danger is that animals may keep eating it, particularly when it is dried in hay where it becomes more palatable, until the harm is done. Learn to recognize its ferny leaves and yellow blooms, control it in your pastures and hayfields, and be especially careful that it never ends up baled into your winter feed. This is one of the great hidden dangers of bought-in hay, so it always pays to know your source and, where you can, to see the fields your hay was cut from. And finally, the 8th, the nightshades, a whole family of common weeds including black nightshade and bittersweet nightshade that turn up in gardens, pastures, fence rows, and disturbed ground across nearly every homestead. These plants bear small berries, green ripening to black or bright red, that are toxic to both people and animals, and the foliage is dangerous as well. Livestock usually avoid them when better forage is available, but they become a real risk in overgrazed pastures, or when the plants get mixed into hay. Learn to recognize the nightshades. Keep them out of your gardens and grazing areas, and watch for them contaminating your animals' feed. They are so common and so widespread that nearly every homesteader will meet them sooner or later, which makes learning their many faces genuinely worthwhile. Now let me speak to you as one steward of the land to another. When you take on animals and ground, you take on their protection, and there are few feelings worse than losing a beloved animal to something you might have prevented. But please hear me, because the answer is not worry, it is knowledge, patiently gained and put to work. Walk your pastures and fence lines regularly, with knowing eyes, especially in spring and after storms. Inspect your hay and know where it was cut. Teach your family, and especially your children, to recognize the dangerous plants and to never taste any wild plant or berry without your word. This kind of watchful, knowledgeable care is the very heart of good homesteading, and it protects everything you have worked so hard to build. But honesty and care require that I say this very plainly. If you ever suspect that a person has eaten any part of a poisonous plant, contact your local poison control center or emergency services immediately, and if you can, bring a sample of the plant for identification. And if you suspect an animal has been poisoned, call your veterinarian right away, because with many of these plants, especially yew and the hemlocks, time is everything, and fast action can mean the difference between life and death. Do not rely on home remedies for a serious poisoning in people or animals. Keep both your poison control number and your veterinarian's number somewhere easy to find, long before you ever need them, and make sure everyone on the homestead knows where they are. So the next time you walk your land, That ground you have poured your sweat and your heart into, look at it with the wise and watchful eyes of a true steward. Among the grass and the brush and the trees, there are real dangers that could threaten your animals and your family, waiting quietly for the unwary. This is not a reason to fear your homestead, but a reason to know it completely, the way the best old farmers always did, when reading the land and its plants was simply part of keeping everything alive and thriving. Learn these plants, teach them to your family, walk your pastures and fence lines with open eyes, and stay with me, because knowing the dangers of the land is exactly what allows a homesteader to work it safely, wisely, and for many good years to come.